This is an area where we have few international agreements, where the technology we think we're dealing with, once we start talking about it, is probably already obsolete, and an area where nations as nation states are not really the only actors, where different individuals or individual groups can act, and in so acting can have profound effects. So as I have been taking over the helm of the Department of Homeland Security, with all of its myriad functions, protection of borders, land, sea, and air, enforcement of the immigration laws, preparation for and response to natural disaster, terrorism and counterterrorism. You know, those basic functions we have in this very, very large department. One area that is going to be of increasing importance for us is the area of cyber, the computer world. How ironic is it that I'm on the same podium with Gates, right, in the Gates Foundation. Let me, if I might, share with you why cybersecurity is such a big deal. You know, in the security world with which I deal, you always hear the issue of emerging threats. Things like the H1N1 virus, an emerging threat. Oh, by the way, it's emerged. But a new threat, an emerging threat. When you talk about cyber, we're really at the stage now where it's not an emerging threat, it is a threat. There are things happening now, and there are things happening every day. Activities have happened in the cyber area that have been increasing in number and severity for some time. And indeed, as we have processed or evolved over the last months, they have even given rise to a whole new vocabulary associated with this cyber world. Words like spyware and malware, spoofing, phishing, botnets. I was at President Obama's press conference where he released his own cyber review report. I think it's the first time in history that the word botnets had been mentioned in the White House. And these words are kind of clever, they're kind of funny, but their effects are most certainly not. It is estimated that last year alone, cyber criminals stole intellectual property from businesses worldwide valued at up to $1 trillion. In the past 2 years, cybercrime has cost Americans more than $8 billion. Cyber adversaries have probed the systems that control our power grids. They make constant attempts to hack into our military networks. Their capacity for mischief is limited only by their imaginations. So how do we know if the computer networks that modern life depends upon are secure? We know that they are not whenever we become the victim of identity theft, if our credit card information is stolen, or our email or our cell phone is hacked. These attacks go beyond being just a personal nuisance. They do real damage, and they can do permanent harm to our finances, our credit, and our reputations. Now take those kind of attacks and multiply them by the size of big public or government networks. Instead of your bank account or your cell phone being compromised, think of attacks that target every single one of a bank's ATMs or the power company that provides electricity to your town or the air traffic control system that governs the safety at an airport. And then you see how we go quickly from words that sound kind of funny and concepts that seem rather new to a major new set of security threats. In the Department of Homeland Security, in the United States government, across the government, we have been addressing and looking at what do we need to do in the cyber world. It gets tricky. It gets tricky because our democracy is built on openness and on sharing of information. The internet was built on openness and the sharing of information. Our way of life demands that our citizens can travel, can share, can in essence exist in an open society with relatively few limitations. But in the cyber world, it's precisely this openness that creates opportunities for harm. So as with so many issues involving security and the challenges that we face, we have to strike a balance. A balance is that on the one hand allows the greater openness for the greatest number of people, but also allows our country to protect classified information, protect intellectual property, protect infrastructure, and protect commerce. So how do we strike this balance, and what are we doing? Cybersecurity is not just a government function. It's also involves the private sector. It includes civilian and military networks. It includes classified and unclassified networks. It has significant international as well as domestic components. In fact, when it comes to the internet, the traditional distinction between international and national really loses its meaning. It doesn't mean very much at all in the cyber world. Computer viruses don't need visas and they don't need passports. Until recently, we could say that this was an emerging threat in cyberspace. It has now emerged. And if we fail to invest properly and strike the proper balance, the damage could be severe. Shortly after taking office, President Obama recognized this. He embarked upon a top-to-bottom review of how the federal government defends information and communications and the infrastructure embodied in there. And he asked for recommend ways to ensure the security of our information and communications infrastructure. The Department of Homeland Security was an integral part of this review. And just 2 weeks ago, the President, in that famous press conference where he said the word botnets, announced the results of this review and charted a new course for our country for the preparation for and response to cyber threats. And what he said is that, first of all, we will deal with cyber as we must, as a strategic national asset. And therefore, our security goals are to deter, prevent, detect, and defend against attacks as we would against any other type of attack, and to be prepared to recover quickly from any disruptions or damage. Hand in hand, the United States will begin a national campaign to promote cybersecurity awareness and digital literacy, and to make new commitments in the areas of math and science and historic investments in research and development. In other words, while we deal with the security issues involving the new cyber world, we also realize that part of our strategic investment has to be in the education of our young people who will be living in this cyber world, and the investment in the research and development that will enable the cyber world to exist and to move forward.